objected to by commissioners was not re-employed on the fallacious ground that he disobeyed the directives of the CU. To wit, GECOM has resorted to referring legal issues to the said Attorney General, whose partisan interest in the election-related matters has been well established. These appointees are the facilitators of GECOM's resistance to embrace the best practices and the legal requirements for the conduct of free and fair elections. All of the aforementioned add up to a GECOM which is not responsive to its constitutional mandate to conduct free and fair elections. GECOM's conduct has either turned a blind eye on glaring flaws or embraced practices, all of which are inimical to voters' enfranchisement. If these concerns, the presence of biased staff, non-adherence to legal provisions and the recommendations of the observers, the rectification of the list, and the engagement of the full commission in the decision-making process, the elections will not meet the standards required of a free, fair, and transparent election, as is mandated by the Constitution. The election will simply be unacceptable, illegitimate, and an undemocratic process. Thank you. You're now free to ask questions. In doing so, please indicate the media house which you represent.
I just want to question this one. Have you requested a copy of this new work plan that is being prepared also?
The new work plan was circulated yesterday evening at 4:30 yesterday evening.
So you haven't had a chance to get to it?
We have had a cursory look, as I said in the statement.
Okay. I mean, I came when you were going through the statement. You just would have said that the voting elections in September will be undemocratic. What it is you can do now as commissioners, or what? I mean, can you do to ensure that the process is free and fair?
All we can do is to continue to insist that the statutory deadlines are adhered to, that we are involved in the decision-making process, and that recommendations which are essential to a proper voters list are adhered to. For example, there is the issue of biometrics. We have gone beyond that issue to suggest that on the voters list, the names of persons overseas, which can be provided and should be provided statutorily by the Chief Immigration Officer, are underlined in the voters list so as to give the scrutineers an opportunity to be more vigilant and alert in relation to the possibility of persons not entitled to vote being able to vote, as has evidently occurred at the 2020 elections.
Isn't an expedited work plan, hasn't there been precedent for this before? GECOM formulating an expedited work plan to meet the election date?
Could you repeat, please?
Isn't there precedent before for GECOM formulating an expedited work plan to meet an election date?
First of all,
it is necessary to understand when you talk of an expedited work plan. In terms of preparing for elections, there are logistical requirements, meaning how much time one can properly take to complete the task. And a number of those tasks, apart from the issues of efficiency, GECOM has established procedures which require for their execution a particular amount of time at the level of GECOM. Other tasks are specified in law. Those are legislative tasks. So, for instance, after someone makes an application to get on the list, there is a procedure. If the person is disallowed after an objection, there is a procedure that that person can appeal. It means that our plan, any plan that is prepared ahead of time, cannot anticipate that. We have to allow in the plan for the statutory timeline to elapse before a decision is made. So if a timeline requires 10 days, we cannot in the plan allocate 7 days, because it means that we have preemptively made a decision on a matter which has not presented itself as yet. Now, if the time comes and nothing happens, there is no appeal, then it means that we will have that time available. But we cannot ahead of time make a decision in relation to that timeline prior to the event actually occurring. So when you speak of an expedited timeline, there are discretionary elements. So for instance, it has been standard, we have never had a claims and objections period in an election cycle that is less than 21 days. 14 days for claims, and it is followed by an additional 7 days for objections. In the current proposal, what you may describe as an expedited plan, 3 days are allocated, so that if you allow, it means that this will have an impact on the electorate, and those are things that you have to correct. But that is not laid down in legislation. These are customs and practices that we have developed over time. And so there are only a few such discretionary decisions that lie within GECOM to make a determination. Those times have been contracted. And that is what another discretionary time is the amount of time allocated to contestants to be able to prepare for nomination day. That is to say, preparing for on nomination day, your submissions are tested for their accuracy and compliance against a list which is produced, so that your submissions, your candidates, and the nominators of those candidates have to exist on the list. Therefore, contestants must be in possession of that list that is going to be used on nomination day for a minimum amount of time to allow them to comply. And that also is not laid down in legislation, but it has been agreed that basically you will give a minimum somewhere around 30 days, 1 month, for anyone to say, look, this is the list. Let me go get my signatures, get my candidates in order to meet nomination day requirements. Now, those are some of the issues that you have. Now, what is being proposed is that you have 4 days. So while someone coming up will have 4 days between the time when the list becomes available and nomination day. So while the elephants will be able to respond, meaning the big parties, because they're all there in the election machinery. So the PNC and the PPP and the big parties will be able, if you give them 4 days, 1 day, they can be able to respond because they're in the business. But what about the other contestants? Are we open? And that is what we need to focus on to ensure that in terms of openness and compliance, that the playing field is level. And our contribution as commissioners to that is to look at that process and to make recommendations and highlight when these things are not complied with.
So just to be clear, you're saying that the new work plan is not in keeping with the statutory guidelines or the law?
I think you would have heard the details of what I've pointed out. The latest plan, which became available late yesterday afternoon. We have not perused it as yet, but as was indicated in the statement, a cursory review, and I did mention some elements just now, specific things that we have observed. We need to go through that in greater detail and study them. But what we know from a macro point of view is that you need a certain amount of time from the extraction of the PLE to election day. Anytime it is less than that time in terms of GECOM's procedures, we know that somewhere in there, something has been cut. You have compromised. So we immediately looked at claims and objections, for example. And immediately we were able to see that claims has been shrunk to 3 days and objections to 5, which includes the 2 days after that. Ordinarily, a minimum has been allocated of 14 days for claims, an additional 21 days for that process. It has now been shrunk to 5 days. So what I'm saying is that these are, when you look at the plan in a general sense, you're able to see that. And I pointed out the specific areas that attention will be needed to be paid to. But what we've been able to know is that as long as GECOM and there's not public knowledge of an election date between 120 and 135 days prior from the extraction of the PLE to election day, something will suffer in the procedures that have to be followed. So GECOM will not, in order to comply with this, to meet September 1st, will not be able to meet its established procedures for the conduct of a number of activities that have to be done.
I'm not quite sure what you meant by an expedited plan, but as has been indicated by Commissioner Forgan, the CEO brought to GECOM a draft plan for elections on September 22nd.
That was the earliest possible date.
He contended was the earliest possible date. In that plan, to a large extent, he was observing the normal practices and statutory deadlines.
There was some
The plan that is now in circulation has reduced the time frame by 21 days, which means internal deadlines have been reduced, many of which would be in contradiction to the custom practice and statutory provisions. Secondly, the current work plan has not been discussed with the commission, and the chairman is reported to have told the president that we can't deliver on September 1 in the circumstance where there was no discussion about delivering on September 1, whilst we were having ongoing discussions about delivering on September the 22nd. So she has unilaterally usurped the authority of the commission. And the public disclosure seems to suggest that in fact she was speaking on behalf of the commission, which was not the case, because our last meeting, we were still discussing a plan that proposed the 22nd. And the CEO was to come back to refine that plan based on issues that were outstanding.
But there's an aspect of Commissioner Corbyn's explanation, which apparently you have with you have understood. He made the point that in a scenario where the time frames is reduced, the larger parties, which he referred to as elephants, have the capacity to be able to meet those deadlines. But we believe, the three of us believe, that elections in Guyana should not eliminate all persons and parties who want to participate in the process. And so the point that Commissioner Corbyn was making is that in the kind of situation where you find a reduced time frame, small parties will not be able to address that concern. And it's important for people to know that.
Okay, so we have two online, Adam Harris and Siblan Mancho.
Good morning, Commissioners. When were you aware, sir, that the President was going to announce his September 21 date? Because I heard you say that the GECOM chairman usurped the role of the CEO, who had originally said that GECOM would have been ready by September 22nd.
We were not aware of the president making an announcement. Like the public, we became aware of an announcement when the president did so in his Independence Day speech. We had no prior knowledge of such an announcement.
So if that being the case, what can be done, given that you're saying that the GECOM chairman usurped the role of the CEO?
Not of the CEO, of the commission, yeah.
The commission.
The commission. What is it that you can do, sir, to nullify that decision? Because you're saying that the chairman acted ultra virus and unilaterally. You're also saying that the chairman actually behaved as though she was the commission. Is that an irregularity? And the question is, what can now be done at this stage?
I must confess that the nature of the operation of GECOMs in the context of the law does not easily provide for these things to be addressed in a court. And we've seen the evidence of that in the past in relation to the allegations of fraudulent votes, where the said chairperson said that we could not take any action in that regard, that it had to go to the court. But after the act had already been committed. So there's a legal problem here in terms of what legal action can be taken, and we will have to leave that to the legal people to make a determination if there is scope in that regard for legal action. But certainly in our ongoing involvement in the commission, we will not be party to or in any way endorse retroactively what has been done unilaterally.
If I were just also to add to that, as pointed out there is a legal issue. In fact, in law, as we understand it, communication and the positions of the commission are communicated through the chairman, so that anything that the chairman does, she does on behalf of. What we understand the process to be is that the commission would deliberate and the decisions of the commission would be communicated beyond the commission by the chairman. What has happened here, as outlined in the statement, is that what the president has indicated is which he says he got from the chairman, is a misrepresentation of what happened and what was the position of the commission at the time when that communication occurred.
So online, Siblan Mancho.
Hi, good day. Sutton Marshall from News Source. Uh, Mr. Carter, you spoke about the process being, or the time. Say, for example, certain processes like claims and objection being significantly reduced. Uh, could you elaborate a bit on the consequences? What are the implications for such an action with regards to those who are expected to cast their vote, but also the political parties hoping to contest the election?
You asked for the consequences. Throughout our contributions to the at the level of the commission internally, we've emphasized that there are activities which we could improve on in terms of our efficiency of their conduct. Those activities are generally not known to the public, but it's a question of how we do things, how fast we could get our materials from a field offices to the headquarters, how quickly we can do data input. However, there are other activities and tasks which involve the public. We have always insisted that those activities, anytime you're going to truncate or do anything to affect activities for which the public is involved or the contestants are going to be impacted, we must have internal consensus and there ought to be consultation with our stakeholders. At this point, in relation to that, there has been no consensus, no discussion regarding the reduction of that time. It means that for contestants, those who are wanting to enter the time frame, we've received calls asking for guidance if we want to get in, what to do. The fact is that those persons who are now learning the process but want to get involved will have, first of all, to understand, and then they have 4 days to respond. We have had situations where someone wanting to be a presidential candidate of a party interfaced with the commission, and during that meeting, we were able to point out, they said, what's your name? We are not seeing it on the list. At this time, claims and objections was in process. This person wanted to be a presidential candidate and was meeting with the commission to get guidance. It means that we will be shortchanging the public with those reduced timeframes because we will be limiting their ability to be able to respond. I don't know, and I hope that that answers the question. In essence, we will be shortchanging the public, which reduces the impact and efficiency and our um, delivery of an election, which could be classified as free, fair, and open.
I would do a slight adjustment. Given the fact that the timelines being referred to now were not agreed to by the commission, the commission will not be responsible for what would occur. But indeed, the public would be shortchanged. But it's not a case where the commission would have made those decisions. It's a case where they would have been made unilaterally by the chairperson and or in cahoots with whoever else behind the scenes.
Okay, we have one more line.
One other question for me, please. The commissioners, Mr. Alexander, Corbin, and forgive me, the name is getting me at the moment, but you've asked, Mr. Trotman, you've lobbied in a sense and table motions, if I could use that term, for biometrics to be applied in the execution or the rollout of elections here. There's also a large concern about the state of the list, the list of electors or voters list. We're heading into elections now. Your demands or your proposals have not been met or have not been taken into consideration consideration to the extent where we're seeing them being implemented. What are your concerns now that the elections is on?
Let me re-emphasize. GECOM somewhere along the process refused to embrace biometrics. We think that is essential. That notwithstanding, we had tabled other propositions which were being discussed up to the time when we last met. We now have a situation where it's very unlikely, if the chairperson has her way, that those matters will be subject of further discussions and decisions, so that this declaration of September 1, under the pretext, would in fact deprive us of the opportunity of coming to conclusions on matters which can impact the conduct of the elections. In fact, what it seeks to do is to undermine the implementation of things that can make the elections free, fair, and transparent. And let me emphasize, our list has somewhere in the vicinity of over 200,000 persons who are not necessarily in the country. Nobody can contradict that. We have evidence that in 2020, such persons were voted for. That also cannot be contradicted. The chief immigration officer verified those allegations. Notwithstanding what people say, it has been verified with the chief immigration officer. Mr. Nandalal took thousands of those names to go and have the verification done, and he claimed that he was going to be able to prove that the allegations were wrong. 2 years have passed, and he's become definitely silent with documents in his possession that can verify the allegations or otherwise. Our proposal to have the names of those persons underlined, highlighted, is a temporary measure to provide for the scrutineers to be vigilant and alert, so that if such persons are going to be voted for by others, we be able to make the necessary objections, and in that way achieve the objective of having a list which does not have names of persons who are not eligible to vote, and the objective of not having multiple or fraudulent votes. The system seemingly embracing the possibility of a fraudulent election.
Okay, thank you, Commissioners.
Things were being discussed that would help the election to be free and fair. And then something that you mentioned about highlighting names. Is it just that, or could you just clarify exactly what the commission was dealing with when it last met?
One, highlighting names was being deliberated on. Two, the incarcerated who are not allowed to vote, and in particular, people on remand. So we're saying even if you contend somebody get jailed for wrongdoing, there are people who are there not yet tried, but they can't vote. And that flies in the face of our constitution, which specifies that any Guyanese who has reached the age of 18 and therefore registered and present in the country has a right to vote. But here we have a system that excludes those persons. It flies in the face of the constitution, a constitution which the chairperson and other persons have been using to argue that certain things ought to be done or ought not to be done, referring Article 159, which says once you're registered, once you're 18, and once you're a citizen, you have the right to vote. And our system is consciously excluding people from that right.
All right, we have Dennis Chabral online. Dennis, go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning, commissioners. Sir, just clarification. As a result of the proposed abridged time frame by which GECOM can be ready, can you say if all of those concerns you raised are embedded in law? And I know you talked about there's a limit to what GECOM can do. Then what are your other options?
There are two questions wrapped up there. One is whether all of the issues that we have identified are embedded in law. The answer is no. Some of them are embedded in law. So the issues that are supportive of contestants, meaning the amount of time you'll be allowed to appeal, and to the time that is allocated to the court to render a decision, those issues are mandated in law. The issue of how much time you allocate to claims and objections, again, it is discretionary at the level of GECOM. But in practice, we have established a practice over time as to our level of flexibility in relation to that. And it always has to do with what is the current circumstance. So there are one which are policy decisions. There are others which we have established procedures so that if you are going to investigate a duplicate, for example, that we have found as a result of processing a registrant, there's a procedure that we have outlined how we go about doing that. The execution of that procedure has a particular time frame. If you cut the time, then what you effectively have done is saying that we cannot follow these procedures, which sometimes are said to be so robust. But none of these robust procedures are allowed to be implemented in the manner in which they were designed. So that is the concern. Now, what we can do about it, all we can do exactly is highlight these things in the process. As you have been seeing from time to time, the arguments occur, you go to a vote, and there's a 4-3 decision. So we will have to continue to be vigilant. This is maybe an additional mechanism. It isn't normal for me, myself, to come to the public to make comments like these, but sometimes people do not. It is important that the issues be known as to what we are doing on the inside. And I think that this is an opportunity where the public could be informed of some of the issues that we are confronted with and what is the type of representation we're making on the inside. The outcome of the process of that we engage in the boardroom is determined in that manner, where it comes down to a majority decision. But we will continue to represent the issues, make suggestions and recommendations to improve the system as we go on and we continue to engage in our duties as commissioners. I want to highlight.
Hold on. Commissioner still speaking. Go ahead, Mr. Commissioner.
I want to highlight some other issues. I think it is embedded in the statement. What we found recently is that a number of the issues that we have to conclude on reaches a point where it is indicated that there need to be legal changes. And as a consequence, we would then have to seek legal. The question is how we go about dealing with that. What the chairman has advanced more recently is that when issues reach that point, it is shifted in that area and referred to the Attorney General. So it is trying the devil's case in hell. So that the representative of the thing, it is unlikely that the state would propose issues and have a different interpretation. We're going back to the state for an objective determination, which isn't feasible. Some of those issues, you would have noted that we have, whether or not we have found in our process that we have not been addressing the issue of domicility for Commonwealth citizens. As we engaged in that and needed to have objective criteria for satisfying that condition, that has been shifted to the Attorney General. There are other issues. Commissioner Alexander would, I think he may have mentioned a few of them. One which hasn't reached that point, but I think we concluded on that more recently, has been referred to the Attorney General. This one has to do with an election day matter. It has to do with rejected ballots on the basis of the absence of a stamp. We have found that when we went through details in the last election, it was able to come to our attention that there have been official error in the stamping of ballots. That is to say, when the voter receives a ballot, they get one sheet of paper. The GECOM official, the election official, is supposed to stamp two ends, because for the process of the count, the paper is torn in half and two ballots are generated. So the stamp you need to have a stamp on both sheets of paper, which emanate from one sheet of paper at the time when it is stamped. We have found, and the evidence indicates, that at least in one polling station in the last election, there were in excess of 20 unstamped ballots after it was separated, while the other one was stamped, which meant that it was an official error in terms of the stamping. We can increase and improve our training to guide the officers in the station in respect of stamping. But the issue still remains. If this situation occurs, what do you do about it? The vote is not responsible for that issue, and the evidence would indicate that it is not a ballot that has been introduced into the system illegally, because in the process of the count, the first procedure is to lay out the sheet of paper and count them before they're separated. At that point, you're able to see, because the ballot is now open, and you could see that one side is stamped and the other is not. The question is, what do we do about it? Because the problem has not occurred as yet. When you separate and you tear that sheet of paper in half, it means that the one half will not have the stamp while the other will. But you will know that there is a potential problem. The issue is, what do you do about that if you identify that situation prior to it becoming a problem? Their proposals, however, the indication is that it's a legal problem. You cannot stamp it after it was given. It was at the time when it was given out. And so we're going to go to the Attorney General. So the point I'm making is that there are several issues which do not come to the public, but which we recognize and we advance within the commission. We attempt to get a resolution. But like I said, we're seeing a trend at the moment where once we reach a certain point in the debate, they're shifted, and there are 5, 6 issues like that that have now been shifted to the Attorney General.
Almost all the issues shifted to the Attorney General will not see the light of day given the new date for elections. They will not see the light of day. And these issues impinge on voter rights. For example, we have a situation where party reps who are working in a place where they're not registered to vote cannot vote unless they leave that place unscrutinized to go where they belong to vote. So it poses one of two problems. Either they will create a situation where they cannot scrutinize what's happening, and so things can go wrong, or they stay and they don't vote. If they stay and don't vote, it means that they are not given their constitutional right to cast a vote. If they leave to go and vote, there's a breach of the security of the process. These things can be resolved. The proposition is that such persons can be given either a certificate of employment or can be allowed a proxy. These matters have been referred to the AG, and we sprint into the elections. And if these matters are not resolved, those persons will be disenfranchised, given a constitution which specifies that they have a right to vote. There are blatant acts here that are interfering with the right of voters at the upcoming elections. We're seeking to have them resolved, and we're seeing post-haste action to ignore these and to proceed with an election.
I have a follow-up to my question. Can I go ahead?
Hold 1 second.
Go ahead, please, but please bear in mind that your question of legalities, though valid, cannot supersede the fact that the things which are being done in the context of this time, this plan, which has not been approved by GECOM, are being done outside of the procedure, the process, the system that requires GECOM to make decisions, which is a constitutional requirement. So we don't necessarily get to the point of the legality or illegality of those acts, because the very basis on which they're being done is in breach of the Constitution. Proceed with your question.
I want to know whether there has ever been any previous instance in which you had a new work plan contraction of deadlines or timelines.
We have had work plans where we have tinkered with deadlines. It has not been to the extent to which these are being tinkered with, but in every instance, those deadlines have been subject to agreement among the commissioners and also in discussion with the stakeholders. That is not what is occurring on this occasion.
Is there still room to do that now that you've already received this amended work plan only, I think, yesterday? And the commissioner will need to perhaps have an engagement with the stakeholders so that you move forward with this abridged work plan?
The comment I want to make has to do with an understanding of the process. While there has been a very clear statement by the president in relation to his intention for election day, the legal process has not unfolded. That is to say, as far as we are aware. As far as we are aware, it is very clear that notwithstanding the change from December 1st to September 1st in the announcement, that is a clear indication which has triggered GECOM because there's that public indication. But there needs to be a proclamation by the president which goes into law at that point in time that says this will be election day. So there's a legal process to follow this. That has not been done as yet. So it is not carved in stone at this point in relation to that. But we have a clear indication that is what is followed. Normally, things will just, at the appropriate time, that documentation will follow in accordingly. But in terms of if these issues are ventilated within the commission, even if it became legal, there's also a legal process which allows the commission to advise the president that notwithstanding the date that you have set, we cannot deliver within that time frame. It is up to the commission now to be able to resolve to come to that position to make such a recommendation. And so we will continue to engage and make these points at the level of the commission. But, with just hoping that there is some internal response to the concerns which have been raised.
But I want to make an intervention here. I believe that in saying what I want to say, that I'll be offending some of the persons here who represent the press. But I believe that the press has a role to play insofar as free and fair elections in Guyana are concerned. At the end of the 2020 elections, the European Union of the observer team made 20 recommendations to GECOM for the improvement of the electoral process in Guyana going forward. In fact, I think there were 22. And one of the things those recommendations considered was the list, which it was felt was top heavy and needed to be addressed. GECOM has all of those recommendations at its disposal. And as far as I know, it has not even attempted to have the kind of concerted discussion of those recommendations, from which GECOM itself can make recommendations to have improvement in the law. How can the press feel when time after time, when we meet, we have to consider the fact that we have a list that is out of sync with reality, and you who can make an impact on this aspect of things have not been doing anything about it. As I said, I believe that a statement like that will offend you because you may believe that that is not part of your function. But it is. If it is that you represented the interests of the people, if it is that you want to extend the views of persons in relation to these matters, you have to take into consideration the fact that there's a voice from the people which is saying that the present list is top heavy and will not result in fairness in relation to the elections.
Chair Duncan for credible sources. First question.
Michael?
First question, with all the considerations and the challenges that GECOM has currently, why are we still faced with these challenges 5 years after the last protracted elections? One. Two, legally, what is the outside date, the furthest date these elections could be held legally? And why then would with that outside date in mind, why then with all of these challenges might GECOM set a date that might compromise its own systems? And number three, could the commissioner say whether the GECOM commissioners and the chairman might have met, forming a majority, and consider these issues and press forward with a date? And is it the norm that the president sets the date, or does GECOM set the date and indicate to the president its readiness to hold elections?
First of all, the other commissioners and the chairperson cannot meet and make decisions. It is specified that GECOM has a quorum which must have present at least 2 commissioners from each of the nominees, so that there is no way in which there could be any legal or legitimate decision made outside of the presence, and we have not been involved in any such meetings. That's the first thing. Secondly, under our constitution, the president has a window from September to
September 1 to December
to
1st.
December 1st to call a date. So he has a window. Thirdly, it is not beyond the legislators and the political actors, if there is a problem that confronts us in relation to meeting that deadline, to collectively at the legislative level make provisions to overcome that problem, as occurred in 1990 when the elections were postponed beyond the stipulated period because of consensus across the stakeholders who then effected legislation. So there are remedies that are available in the circumstance.
Does that answer all the questions?
The other question was if there were any exigencies that you might have thought of that might facilitate the early date. Because you did say the commission had, I think, September 22nd as the date.
We need to be clear on that. And maybe here I would want to outline the process. In March, we represented to the commission that on the basis of our scheduling, that the commission needed to put on the table its own work plan, given that elections would be, assuming that there is no early action by the president, we would have to be ready between September 1 and December 1st. Consequently, we needed to have a working plan to show our ability. We made that presentation to the commission, which triggered the plan which was produced. That plan indicated, in terms of our own workings, it meant that by the end of April and latest the beginning of May, no later than the 3rd of May, we needed to have a date to make September 1. We needed to be told because our normal work schedule would not permit an election in September. And it meant that we would have had to know the date so that we could shift up claims and objections, which would come in our normal cycle of registration after the close of registration on the 30th of May, in accordance with the amendments which were made in 2022. So the point I want to make here is that we recognize that in order to do that, we needed to have information, concrete communication, late April, in relation to elections, in order to be able to deliver. As long as that time moved on, it means that the time when we will be able to deliver. So when the Secretariat delivered its first draft, they came up and said that if we run from now where we are, we cannot deliver earlier than September 22nd. In that plan, there were issues in order to make that delivery. And I would want to point out to you one of the significant issues with September. The amended legislation requires a revision of the list 3 months after the qualifying date. The list that is going to be produced in our normal course of things will have a qualifying date of 30th of April, 30th of June, sorry. It means that that list which will be produced in the normal course of our activity, will not be usable after the 30th of September. So that even in the first draft, the Secretariat was conscious that they got to get a date before the 30th of September. So they, in fact, in that early draft, also put in some cuts to allow them to come in the week before the 30th of September. Now, it is not, when that was brought to the attention of the issues, this became one of the areas to be addressed. And if they were properly addressed, it means that it was likely for them to go over the 30th. So when we saw a bill being introduced in Parliament to adjust the wording shall and may in relation to the revision, it immediately gave an indication that there was some recognition at that time, and we assume this is behind this. This is at that level, not in the commission. But of course, the communication would have occurred that there is a possibility in the normal course of things that to meet some of these deadlines, we will go over September 30th, and provision needed to be made to cater for that, because that is a legal hurdle. Hence, a bill that is now, I am told, tabled to change shall to may, giving a discretion to GECOM whether or not to do the revision of the list. Now, all of those are indications that the Secretariat has been doing its work behind the scene to facilitate what they see as eventualities. So this announcement in terms of shifting that date to September, to much earlier than what the Secretariat said is the earliest possible date, even violates their judgment in relation to what is operationally feasible. Of course, they would say, okay, you said is that if we are to meet this date, these are the things that we have to cut. What we will have to do is to point out that if you cut these things, while some of them are legal and you may satisfy those, there are some which will impact the stakeholders and potential contestants adversely, and we need to bring that to their attention because we understand the process of decision making within GECOM.
All right, we have no one line. Adam? Adam, go right ahead. Adam, Harris.
Go ahead.
Yes. Commissioners, recently, I think it was the EU that turned up with some money to train GECOM staff for a better election. Given this new deadline, what will that impact have on this proposed training program? Because I didn't know when it was supposed to start and end. Will this new deadline impact the training program? And one question, I don't know, it might be out of place. But the GECOM chairman, sir, and this is from Mr. Alexander, claimed that you cussed her to her face. Was it because of this very attitude, sir?
I've never cursed her. I've told her she's incompetent. And I'm prepared to say that to her face and publicly. The question, the deadline which we raised is the EU's funding is not for the training of GECOM staff. EU's funding is for public, civic and voter education. That task has been deployed to no, not NADI, the other one. That task has been deployed to an international electoral agency. The task for public education has been deployed. They've been retained by the EU in consultation with GECOM to conduct public education. It's something like what we had in the last occasion, Vote Like a Boss, something like that. Obviously, if the date is brought forward, because GECOM would have told them what is the projected date. So obviously, if the date is brought forward, it will impact public education timetable as well. I never cursed GECOM. I've never cursed in GECOM. But if she considered me saying she's incompetent, which I'm prepared to say publicly, then that may be described as cursing.
All right, any more questions in-house? In-house? Anybody have any questions? No? All right, Dennis, you have the last word.
Yes, the last question. Sirs, can you say if between the last meeting and last night, that's the last meeting of GECOM and last night, whether there was any oral or written indication that a new draft work plan would be submitted? Or this has caught all of you by surprise?
It has caught all of us by surprise. We have no knowledge. We heard an announcement on the 26th, and we then received electronically a new draft around 4:30 on
Yes.
the 26th. So the announcement was midnight. It predated us receiving the proposed new draft work plan, but certainly preempted any collective decision of GECOM for a new work plan.
All right, Commissioners, I think this is it. There are no more other questions.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen of the press. If there is need for clarification, please feel free to contact any one of us. We will not be distributing hard copies now. We wish to have all of the email addresses, and in very short order, we'll send an electronic copy of the release to each and every one of you. Thank you.